Welcome back, everyone. Just about a week left to go till the NBA season starts. A lot of you probably are having your drafts this week. Today, we're going to talk about strategies going into the draft. First and foremost, the most obvious thing is you need to be doing some mock drafts. Um, you don't need to go crazy with the mock drafts, but what I tend to kind of preach is do a couple of mock drafts to begin with, kind of get a feeling for where um, general consensus is for most players, kind of where they're going more often than not. What I tend to do is I'll kind of do like 2, 3 drafts, and I'll tend to notice that I'm getting a lot of the same players, especially late in the draft. That's kind of my starting point for the entire season. Uh, I like to find those late guys in the draft that I feel are well valued. Um, some people call these the sleepers. So there's kind of it's not really well defined, but like some people might consider sleepers just very late picks, like 10th round and beyond. While I kind of tend to think of a sleeper more as getting top 20 value anywhere after the fifth round in a draft. I guess a good example of that would be Draymond Green last season. I mean, if you were kind of had him penciled in from the beginning before the season as this guy's going to explode, this is his year, I'm going to reach for him even in the fifth round, but I believe in him that he's going to end up being top 20. To me, that's kind of a sleeper from that perspective. And more importantly, if you believe in this, if you have a player like that going into this year or two, ideally you kind of want to prepare your whole draft and your whole team around those guys. So for example, what happened to me over the past few days when I did my mocks is I tend to get a lot of I feel comfortable with the point guards that are going really late in drafts. So I kind of went from there and I worked backwards from there. So I realized that I can get a lot of assists late in the draft, significant assists. I can get significant steals and I can get significant minutes from a lot of those point guards that go late. So with that in mind, I realized, okay, maybe I shouldn't worry so much early on in the draft and even in the middle of the draft about point guards. And since I was having a hard time kind of finding good big men late in the draft, I kind of figured, okay, I'm gonna go into my draft and I'm gonna go big heavy to begin with. Ideally spend a first or second rounder on a great big, and then kind of get a couple of more good power forwards or centers in the middle rounds. That way, I don't have to worry about this late in the draft. And I've also got those point guards that I really value relatively to where they're going in the draft, so that they can kind of give me that top 50, top 100 production, even though I'm getting them in the 12th and 13th round. And that way I can have a nice overall, I can have a team that's kind of well rounded in just about every aspect. And again, I'm kind of speaking about a head to head, a general head to head 9-cat Yahoo League. But again, the strategy shouldn't really change much based on the settings of your draft. So that's one thing I kind of want to mention. Work backwards in your draft and kind of go from there. Another thing is, ideally, if you're playing with people you know, or at least some of the people you kind of have a close relationship with, you guys can kind of come up with a deal to kind of prioritize to decide the order of the draft ahead of time. I'm still kind of pushing this on my league because this could give you a really big advantage for strategizing for your whole season and your whole draft. If you know where you're drafting, you can spend a lot more time practicing at that spot and kind of trying out your strategies from there, as opposed to having to be ready, at the time of the draft to realize, okay, this is where I'm drafting. I'll just figure it out on the fly. You don't want to have to do that. So try to get your league to kind of decide the order ahead of time. That way, everybody can kind of have a plan going in. If you're doing some sort of a keeper or dynasty league, or even regular leagues, it might be fun to maybe start thinking about trading draft picks at that point. If you kind of know where you're going, if you kind of know where you want to draft, where you want to have more picks in a draft, where you want to have less picks in a draft. I kind of found myself. I find that there's this long stretch in the middle of the drafts that I'm not really crazy on anyone, and I find there's this other mid-rounder stretch where I really want a lot of those guys. So ideally, if you can try to find a way to start trading draft picks and stuff like that, by all means go ahead. But again, that's for more advanced leagues, so don't really get all thinking about that kind of stuff. What else did I want to mention today? Um, if you don't if you don't have kind of the order ready ahead of time, one thing I would preach kind of is to have a 1 through 4 strategy, 5 through 8 strategy, or 9 through 12 strategy. And by that I mean like which pick you're going as. If you're one of those early picks or if you're one of those late picks, you'll have back-to-back or relatively close picks, and then you'll have these long stretches where you're waiting. Whereas if you're in the middle, you're kind of having consistent picks every 12 picks, I believe, something like that. So kind of go through the mocks and try every single position. Kind of have a strategy for each spot in the draft, or at least those 3 sections I just mentioned. And I believe Yahoo, it's pretty standard for the order to be decided 30 minutes before the draft. So what you want to do is you want to be in your draft exactly 30 minutes before, so you can find that order as soon as possible, and you can start getting rid of the strategies that you're not going to be using, and kind of start focusing on what will be happening. Go like use those 30 minutes before the draft. Use every minute of them. What you want to do is you want to finalize your strategy. You want to remind yourself, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what tends to happen when I'm drafting at this position. And again, work backwards from the draft. Keep your strategy in mind, stick to it. Don't try to break off plans too much unless you find some great value in the draft. And one last thing I want to mention, I tend to find that when you're going second last or second, so the spot right before the person who goes twice. I know punting strategies are getting really kind of popular these days, and a lot more people are doing them. So what I noticed was that it was starting to get really obvious about people what they're punting right from within the first 3 picks of the draft. So if you're that guy that goes right before and right after that guy who goes back to back, what you kind of want to do is you want to check his team after the 3rd round, and you want to get a feeling for whether he's punting something or not. And this goes back to knowing your opponents. If you can figure out what they are punting, you can really be in a position where you can get kind of 2 picks that you want without having to risk losing one of them. So what tends to happen to me is, it just happened to me a couple of hours ago. I had 2 guys in mind at the 2nd pick on the way back in the 4th or 5th round, and I wanted to make sure I got both of them, but I had one significantly higher ranked than the other, and I checked the guy coming after me, his team, and I realized quickly that he was going for these really efficient players, like efficiency in terms of field goal percentage and free throw percentage. Well, and one of the players that I had in mind was a really efficient guy, and one of them was a really non-efficient guy. So what I did was, knowing that the guy wouldn't go for these inefficient guys, I chose the efficient guy ahead of the inefficient guy. That way the inefficient guy could fall to me and I would have both of them. So keep these kind of things in mind. This goes back to knowing the people in your league, their tendencies. And I guess some more, evil moves you can do is kind of go through some mocks with the people in your draft. Ideally, you want to give as little information as possible in these mocks. You kind of want to just, you don't want to tip your hat at all. Maybe you want to even lie and, try to get bad ideas in your friends' or enemies' heads. But what you want to do is, if you do mock with friends and the people in the league, you want to try to get a feeling for who they're going after, what kind of strategies they're using, and like every little piece of advice you can get from them, you can use to your advantage in the draft. And even in the season, through trades and whatnot. All right, so I kind of took a little bit longer than I wanted to today. But thanks for watching, and see you next time.